Hey, everybody. Welcome. Joining me for a live. I'm going to talk a little bit about a concept called mental topography, or intellectual topography. So, what we're thinking about here is a like a landscape that we put all of our experiences on, and they take up space in this mental landscape. So think of it as a little kid is born and they have like a map, right? If you lay it out flat, and every experience that that child has from the moment they're born is placed on this topographical map. Now that a map evolves along with their brain. So we have developmental markers, right? Up to 18 months is a developmental marker, up to 2 years is developmental, and then there's another's at 6 and 7. And as the brain develops in children, this mental or intellectual topography, where they place things, grows and it gets bigger and it becomes more complex. So, why does this matter? When we're thinking about socializing children into functioning adults that they very quickly become, we want to be very careful what we place on that intellectual topography. So, let's say, a child has their map. Whatever happens to them, because there's not very much stuff on that map, it's going to seem big. So, an event that happens, it's a big event. So, what seems to an adult like maybe not that big of a deal, to a child could be this huge landmark event because they don't have very much on their intellectual topography. So, everything that's on there is really big and noticeable. So, when we look at recent cultural shift toward talking to children about adult subjects, I think a lot of us intuitively understand the problem with it, but to break it down academically, here we go. So we know that exposing children to adult subject matter is highly damaging. It's heightened anxiety and fear, confusion due to an inability to understand complex subjects, behavioral issues. They begin to exhibit aggression or withdrawal, desensitization toward violence or suffering. It does normalize certain behaviors. It can. Trauma symptoms. They can develop intrusive thoughts and hypervigilance, distorted worldview where they're now experiencing mistrust and feelings of insecurity, sleep disturbances. Nightmares aren't normal for anyone. And that was something I had to learn personally. Nightmares aren't normal. Regressive behavior. So children going back to bedwetting, thumb sucking, needing a security blanket. Difficulty concentrating and learning. So kids that are dealing with adult stress will have trouble academically as well, and that's a known symptom of stress. And so what's behind that? When it comes to specifically when we're looking at things like that post I made from the screenshot from that woman's post, rape, genocide, war, human trafficking, I deal with adults on a daily basis in coaching who struggle with these topics. This stuff is so heavy that even as an adult, it is too heavy to carry all the time. We have to set it down. Putting that on a child who has an undeveloped intellectual map traumatizes them. So now you have a child for whom the topic of sexual abuse takes up this whole big part of their intellectual topography. So now this child, everything that they learn subsequently relates back to that and that traumatizing issue, because once a child, you explain to them and they start to grasp what it means, it's traumatizing for them, it's horrifying. So now everything relates back to that. You've now created a core memory and a core part of that child's identity. And we may assume that children who are abused are going to have that experience anyway. No, that's not the case. Not all victims have their experiences centered in their personality. There are things that can happen that make that more likely, where now this child becomes an adult who is suffering complex post-trauma disorder. This stuff, so if we look more at childhood development and the ages of development, and why it affects them so much, between the ages of 1 and 3, a child is developing autonomy. So autonomy is a separation of self from the world. Up until the age of 3, a child has no sense of differentiation from themselves in the world. So mother is child, child is mother. They're one. Everything in the world is there to serve the child. And of course, they're completely vulnerable. They have, that's how they're programmed to be. And they're very good at getting us to take care of them, as they should be. But so there is no separation of self from the world. So under the age of 3, and in a lot of cases, like, you just be safe and say under the age of 6, when you're talking to a child about what goes on in the world, they have a really hard time separating the world from them. So what that means is if the world is bad, they're bad. They don't have that separation of self and world. It is a neurological development. They actually don't have the gray matter that produces that level of consciousness yet, and it slowly develops right between about 3 to 6. So when we're thinking about that brain development, if you're talking to a child under the age of 6 about these topics, they are going to relate that back to, this is a part of who I am. So they're either going to internalize the victim mindset, or they're going to internalize this kind of shame and guilt for something that they feel guilty about happening that they've never actually done. The other component of this is it's the anxiety that comes from a child being told all of these terrible things that are happening in the world, and they have absolutely no agency to do anything about it. So now you have a situation where this child has knowledge but no power. What does that do to a person? We have really good research on it. It actually stimulates a primal stress response. So this completely circumvents the neocortex, the thinking logical part of the brain. It goes straight to the fight or flight part of the brain, where on a deep, deep subconscious primal level, it triggers this deep lingering anxiety that never goes away. And I see this in adults too that I work with. If you are an adult who exposes yourself to, if we call it like doom scrolling or whatever the case is, if you expose yourself to traumatic events or traumatic experiences that you have no control over, you will make yourself experience anxiety and depression. It's not good for us. So we need to take on challenges in the world, yes, be agents of positive change in the world, yes, but make sure you're make sure you're taking bites that you can chew. Don't take on things emotionally that you can't do anything about. You are hurting yourself doing that. Just a heads up. Now, what happens when we do this to children? So when you teach children about all of these horrors in the world, but you deprive them of agency to be able to act and do anything about it, you're building this sense of learned helplessness. So these are people who come into adulthood with they experience deep, deep seated anxiety and depression that is linked to this kind of nihilistic, um, there's a specific word for it that I'm blanking on, but this really like negative worldview. I guess just nihilistic is a good way to put it. Um, the There's nothing worse, I think, than seeing a 6-year-old like struggling with anxiety because of like poverty in another country. So again, the map. So what we teach these children, they become these big things on the map. Think of Greta Thunberg crying, losing her mind over climate change, becoming this activist based on information that had been fed to her as a child. Now in 2025, Bill Gates comes out and says that, as it turns out, climate change actually isn't going to kill everybody. So, I mean, if you kind of, she's difficult to sympathize with in a lot of respects, just by way of her own personality. But as a child, she was a little bit of a victim, right? Of manipulation and this kind of parentification or adultification, where we take a little brain that is not prepared to handle these big ideas, and we expect them to perform as adults, and that is a form of abuse. So that's kind of what I wanted to go over. I just kind of wanted to discuss the idea of that mental topography and thinking of everyone's mind as a map, and the way that map develops slowly in our early years, and how the things we place on that map take up a big amount of space and become a big part of who we grow up to be. And so, my question to you guys watching is, if you think back into your own childhood, what are the big things that happened that stayed with you? I think we think of them as core memories. And for some people, they may be core traumas. Some people, I've seen children be absolutely traumatized by having a rabbit put in their lap. And so I'm always curious as to like what it was that, some people, because little kids are funny, they get scared over things that we adults think are silly, but that's really unfair to the littles because they have a limited map. And so I always wonder, what are these big things? Because I don't think we think about it much on a regular basis. What are those things that were there trips that you took, conversations you overheard adults having, things you saw that became a part of your topography for the rest of your life and kind of shaped where you placed everything else on your map afterwards? I'm really curious to hear how other people relate to this, and if this concept makes sense and helps you conceive of childhood development and brain development a little bit easier. I know I'm a very visual person, and so for me, that kind of spatial visualization is really helpful. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think, and share this video so more people can get on in on the conversation. Let you guys go. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everybody.